Hi, welcome back for another episode of Let's Talk About It. I'm joined today by Tony UV. He is the CEO and founder of Versebright Security. Welcome, Tony, to the show.
Thanks for having me, Amy. Appreciate it being here.
So, I have a question for you. It is around threat modeling, which is
Okay.
your specialty, I suppose. What is threat modeling? Because when I was thinking about it, it's really not the same as threat detection, threat analysis. Like, can you truly describe what is threat modeling?
I think that's the million-dollar question a lot of people have when they are looking at threat modeling today. Threat modeling has been building in terms of its momentum in the information security, cybersecurity space. And a lot of people are asking the same exact questions, right? What is this thing? Is this something net new that I have to now go out and learn how to implement into my program? Well, simple terms, the definition of threat modeling is building a model of threats. That's pretty much it. Like if you look at your own organization, let's take two scenarios. Let's say that you're obviously a CISO and you are looking at your security program and trying to think about what are the model of threats that are affecting me as a retailer, as a manufacturing company, as a bank, et cetera. The other more micro example is let's say that you're a product manager and you're building software. You want to be able to, as you're building software, designing software, you want to also think about what are a model of threats that I need to have against my product that could actually undermine the integrity of the product, et cetera. Now, different from what some of the things that you put on the table there, like threat detection, right? Threat detection is more operational. Threat analysis, again, very operational. Threat modeling is more strategic, right? It's trying to look at things before. So threat operations where you're like doing like threat intel hunting or threat, hunting, very operational, right? A lot of research into different hacker forums, trying to harvest a lot of intel so that you could basically pull out some golden nuggets and say, I think I got something here. Threat modeling actually puts a frame around all of that, right? So you do threat analysis within threat modeling, you do threat research within threat modeling. Um, the simplest way to provide an analogy is if you look at the military. Of course, you can imagine like you see those like big aircraft carriers that are out there on the seas, right? And they're carrying like all these different like jet fighters and whatnot. Moving from like let's say the Indian Ocean to I don't know the Pacific Ocean takes a lot of time, orchestration. Like you got to make sure that if you're positioning your air base, floating on the water to a certain location, it's based upon good threat intel. Intelligence and data fuels a good threat model. And so threat modeling is fairly new into the um, marketplace as a ways to be able to contextualize, hey, who are my threats? What are my threat actors that I'm defending against? Why should I even care? Like if this threat happens, like, do I budge? Is this going to really make my business or my product really sink? So that is a kind of a long, hopefully beneficial definition of what is threat modeling.
So is when you say make a threat model,
Mm-hmm.
is that just kind of describing the threat, all of the aspects of the threat, how it would affect your environment, or what do you mean by make a threat model, I guess?
Right. Yeah. So a model of threats should basically give you some element of, first off, one of the main ingredients in the threat model is going to be your threat list. What are some different, lists of threats that you care about? And security people are going to be like, oh, you mean like MITRE attack, or you mean like, I don't know, MITRE something else like KPEC, right? Or MITRE CVEs. And no, wrong answer. When you want to come up with a set of true threats, you want to think of things about that really the CEO of that company would understand, or a threat analyst, or a software manufacturer. Let's go through some examples. So if I say, hey, your application product that is SaaS based has the possibility of sandbox escaping in the environment. The CEO of that same company might be like, well, I don't know what that is. But if you tell the same group and say, hey, a threat that's really a problem for our product is that information might get compromised. You have information compromised as a threat. You might have extortion as a threat. We see a lot of that today. A threat model begins with a good library of threats or a list of threats, and it has things like threat attributions, like who is the threat actor. There's different approaches to threat modeling. We'll get into that in a second. But a simplistic model of threats is what is my list of threats? How could they actually happen in my environment? And the how to is where you have things like, okay, associated attack patterns, correlated vulnerabilities, use cases that might be impacted, business impact of the product. And so some threat models is just a lot of text. Other threat models are a diagram that kind of shows how these models could affect your product in terms of like, uh, some of the application flows within the product. So there's really no definitive, like if I were to say, or you were to ask me, hey, what's a pen test report? Everyone kind of knows pen test reports is going to have a lot of listings of how your product is vulnerable to different types of, exploits. Threat modeling doesn't really have this is the standard output. Now that could, I think at this point in time, present some level of challenges because, there's no standard. And if you want to compare threat models, it can make it somewhat difficult. But I think threat modeling is one of the most important security disciplines that a program can have today. Because if you look at everything else that we're doing, we're basically just showing up to work and without context, doing a pen test, doing a vuln scan, doing a code review, right? We're doing all these things without the correlation. And
Mhm.
so the threat model correlates and says, okay, of these things that I found in all these disciplines, how do they relate to my model of threats that I actually care about?
That are then company and industry specific.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, cool. So what I'm hearing you say is that threat modeling kind of helps you uncover threats and exposure to your organization, as does most threat detection, analysis, modeling, whatever. But at the end of the day, you're uncovering your blind spots. You're uncovering what could potentially happen, right? So what else are you doing, I guess, to uncover these blind spots for people?
So I'll go back to the earlier part of that question, and let me just, let's say I'm not going to ask you a personal question like whereabouts in the world do you live, but let's say that you live in Topeka, Kansas, right? And I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and so how you and your family might protect yourself in Topeka is going to be different than how I protect myself in Atlanta, right? Because we have different, environmental threats. Right? You guys might have a lot of more tornadoes than we do here in Atlanta. Crime might be different, right, in Atlanta versus Topeka. All these sort of things. Innately, as individuals, we kind of protect our cars, our belongings, our houses, our persons based upon the intel that we naturally process as humans. When we do things like threat detection, we're largely allowing that an industry or reports or a tool is dictating, hey, you should care about this. It's like me going to Topeka, Kansas, saying, you know what? You really got to have 5 pit bulls. If you really want home defense, you got to have 5 pit bulls. Otherwise, you're not really doing it. So threat detection, that's sort of like when you're detecting a threat and it's detected in a tool, the tool has engineered a lot of what's called signatures to say this is a problem. And it is devoid of any context of like, what is a problem to that business owner? What is a problem to that application owner? So threat modeling now brings in all that context, and it's a very context rich type of discipline. So I don't know if I answered your question, but you got me with the first part of it. I did want to be able to hone
Yeah.
in on the second part.
I guess what I want to know is what does it actually entail? Like, what tactics are you using to understand this information?
Perfect. So this is where, I can basically, talk a little bit about pasta. Is it okay if I show something on the screen?
Sure.
As I get this queued up and shared, I do want to say that PASTA is an acronym that stands for Process for Attack Simulation and Threat Analysis. It is a methodology invented in 2015 by me and another gentleman called Marco Morana. And we came up with, we're both been in the industry for quite some time, over nearly 30 years. And what we basically saw was like, you know what? No one outside of security believes us. We do a pen test, we run a vulnerability report, we look at cloud audits, and we want remediation, and sometimes remediation doesn't happen in the time that we want. So what can we introduce that would actually contextualize this to people that run products and services and businesses. So we came up with leveraging threat modeling. PASTA is a risk-centric threat modeling approach. It is a true methodology. It has 7 steps, and you can use a lot of the tools that you're using today to feed. There's inputs and outputs to every stage. The stages in blue are functional steps. What do I care about in the application? What is the attack surface of the application, and how does it work? Privileges, call flows, data flows, stuff like that. Very functional. 4, 5, 6, the red blocks are really meant to be around what could go bad. If you're building an application like a reservation system for let's say a patient, not a reservation system, but like a patient portal. Everyone goes to the doctor. You go to your primary care physician, you have to fill out a patient portal. You put in a lot of information there. So what are some of the bad things that could happen on a patient portal? Well, your patient data can be compromised. That's one. So there's threat number one, compromise of protected health information, right? And so you go through these exercises in each one of these blocks to come up with a threat library stage 4. Correlate all the vulnerabilities you have of stage 5 to what you have in your attack surface of stage 2. Right? A lot of times developers or product owners, they don't even know what they're running in their own application environment, right? Because there's so many people that are building software. They have front-end developers and back-end developers and things like that. So it's really difficult for everyone to really know, like, what are we really running here to represent the attack surface? But when you start to correlate vulnerabilities to the attack surface that supports the threat, and you start to be able to prove that those vulnerabilities are indeed exploitable and support a threat objective, now you're going to get a receptive audience. So if you ask me, well, like, what are the tools? Well, first you need an approach. And PASTA is a risk-centric approach that you can use. And you don't have to do all 7 steps. You could do, maybe you see some of the stuff in PASTA. If you go into any one of these steps, they have activities. And this tells you what you should be, putting in as inputs, right? So for threat analysis, you want to be able to correlate threat advisories to your attack surface, et cetera. You can make your own PASTA, right? You can take some of these 7 steps and you can deprecate some of these activities or create a maturity model that says, okay, first year of doing threat modeling, I want to do 137 or 246. And that way you're able to kind of make your own PASTA, right?
Okay, yeah, and these individual activities that you've got going on, um, I'm just having a look. It's like research and correlate threat advisories. It's mapping threat vulnerabilities to your attack trees. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess this also kind of answers my question too, because I was wondering how you offer this as a service.
Yes. Well, Versprite, we've been doing threat modeling for a very long time. So we have a lot of experts that are doing a lot of these types of operations. So let me just go again. Amy, you are a CISO of a very large multinational company. In your security program, all of these honeycomb cells that are blinking are actually activities that very large multinational companies in their security program, they do. They have application assessments. They do business impact analysis. They abide by control frameworks, et cetera, et cetera. So threat modeling as a service is being able for someone like us, Versprite. What we do is we start a security program that is doing threat modeling for our client organizations so that we can get them started. We get the process, the methodology, the standard operating procedures started, and the deliverables so that they get to threat model their applications they have under management. Some organizations, especially the very large ones, might have close to 5,000 applications. Now, if you're looking at this video and you might be wondering, how do I know what application is a threat model? Great question. That's going to come really to a decision tree on, you got to look at all your applications and say, what are the most critical, right? Let's start there. What are our flagship applications that affect revenue and whatnot? Even if you were to do a subset of those applications, threat modeling as a service, what it is that it allows us to be able to build out an SOP, run the program, actually train, work with security champions that we will develop within organizations so that they can then now become threat modeling experts or security champions to carry on forward a threat modeling, repeatable threat modeling process. We actually developed a SaaS-based tool called Fork, right? Because you eat pasta with a fork. Very clever. And basically, what we do is it allows you to do a pasta threat model in 2 hours. Normally this type of activity with the 7 stages would take quite some time, but we know that time is of the essence, and we want to be able to get a lot of product teams to be able to do threat modeling within their software development lifecycle.
Right. But how are you packaging it up and presenting it to your customer, I guess? Does it come in like you have a meeting with them and you present to them a PowerPoint, or what is the actual end product, I guess?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So everyone likes to know just the nitty gritty, right? The overall facts. In risk centric threat modeling, you have that the risk centric approach says, what is my overall risks stemming from threats in my threat model? So we want to present, number one, a report. What the clients get as part of threat modeling as a service is they get a report saying, this is your library of threats. This is the likelihood that these threats could happen based upon the context of vulnerabilities that we found and vulnerabilities that we could actually exploit in your environment. So if you look at some of the things that are here, you see a quality gate top left, right, that shows pass fail. Based upon all the information that was input into the threat model, we feel that this application shouldn't really pass a quality gate. And a lot of clients like that. They just want to know, like, should I pump the brakes and fix some of this stuff before I go to market, or push this build out for release? Residual risk means, what is the risk that I'm left over, right? This is net of my web application firewall, net of my other defenses that I have. What are the types of risks that I'm sitting back with if I release this product? Residual risk is something that's extremely important. So if you look here closely, when you get the magnifying glass out, so it breaks down and says, hey, some of the residual risk for the application is based upon 15% of threat campaigns or threats that were tied to your actual product. There's actually active campaigns running right now within the past 6 to 12 months that are exploiting either your industry or your attack surface. 73% of the residual risk is that there's unmitigated vulnerabilities that are in this product, right? So they're just waiting for someone to take advantage of them. Now, there's actually 11.16% of the correlated attack patterns that are tied to the product that could be weaponized to undermine basically the overall risk of the product. There's a quality gate that you can define within Fork that allows you to say, what's a passing grade? Is it 70%? Is it something above and beyond that? And then there's countermeasures. What sort of defense mechanisms do you have that we're able to extrapolate that shows that are going to help to reduce some of that residual risk? And then really quickly, this is one of my favorite. Who doesn't love a good radar or spider diagram, right? I mean, they're so sexy. And so out of 11 threats in the threat library, it shows you, and there's basically a legend that shows you what is T1, T2. T2 might be extortion. T1 might be information compromise. T3 might be sabotage. These are threats that are specific to your industry or sub-industry, and they will show you what sort of campaigns, attack patterns, and vulnerabilities are popping off per each threat. Really simple, right? You take a look at it and you're like, okay, now I get it. And then last but not least, there is the CIACC. And we allow the user of Fork to be able to say, what do you most care about? Let's say if you're Bloomberg Financial, you supply financial information all around the world to different financial institutions. Integrity of that data is so key. Or healthcare, right? Healthcare data integrity is so key. So that might be you prioritize it one, and you kind of see what is the impact of the current residual risk issues to the CIACC. Connectivity means that you might not be managing sensitive data. You might not be heavily regulated. You don't even care if you're down for 3 weeks. But what happens if you're connected to all these different other players and they could usher in malware? They could, basically disseminate, ransomware and stuff like that. So it's important to be able to, have this sort of information, at a glance, And a lot of our clients love this, right? Because they get it from a product owner standpoint, they get it as a developer. When you do threat modeling, you want to make sure that your messaging is basically able to transcend across all stakeholders. That's a good sign of a good threat model.
Right. I was going to ask you too what specifically threat modeling is uncovering, I guess, but some of the things kind of came on the screen. But can you say more verbally?
Yeah, absolutely. At the end of the day, it's I always like to use this metaphor. If the product owner of an application that you're working on turns to you in the elevator as you're going up to the building and they say, "Hey, what are the top threats I got to worry about?" And you got literally 30 seconds, right?
Mhm.
Most security people are going to say, well, things that they hear and listen to that are on different advisories, but that's not contextual to the business. What this does is allow you to say to that product owner or product VP and say, listen, the main thing we got to worry about is, integrity based threats because we actually have 50 vulnerabilities that could really undermine our data. And if they alter the data, we could actually affect how physicians diagnose patients. And that right there, a product owner is going to be like, what do we do to fix this? Right. It's a different form of response that you get versus let's take the threat analyst. They say, well, yeah, the we just found a new campaign, APT 42, out of let's say Iran, and they are seen to exploit some of the Linux packages or JavaScript packages that we're running in the environment. They're going to be like, what? They're going to be like, what does that mean to me? What does that mean to us? And so threat modeling does so much more to contextualize threats, vulnerabilities, attack patterns, so that basically a product owner now understands what are the threats that really are impactful to me.
Right. But what are those threats? I mean, I guess it's different for every business, but where are the most common ones? Are there common ones? Can
Yes,
you
that's a
do the
great
elevator
question.
pitch? Is it possible?
Well, hey, you're asking the right questions. Let me
Can
show you a
you
free
share your screen
resource that's
again?
out there. Yeah. So Fork actually has a community version for free. You can go onto forktm.com and you can sign up and you can play with a threat model that is geared just for financial. However, we at Versprite are actually releasing industry threat libraries for free in JSON format. And we also have visualization tools in this folder here so that you can go in and visualize what do these threats look like. So um, for energy, you can go and see what are the threats for energy, financial, healthcare, manufacturing, retail, and telecommunications. We are actually coming up with 5 additional industries. But just to kind of show you what the energy one looks like, these are basically mind maps, right? So if you think of yourself as an energy service provider, um, what are some of the threats that could affect you in your business? So let's start with the parent node in this tree of threats. I want to, and when you do threat modeling exercises, they're always fun. You should try it sometime when you're with your friends at a bar, and you basically say, hey, well, let's come up with a threat library. Okay. Well, you got to play the evil villain, and that's always a fun role. So you say, well, I want to manipulate energy prices. All right. I want to do corporate espionage, right? Maybe you want to be able to see what BP is doing from Exxon, vice versa. I want to do corporate sabotage, right? And that's all these things have precedence, by the way. I want to disrupt energy distribution, right? I want to disrupt energy production, right? In the energy sector, production, distribution are major
Mhm.
operational issues. So now let's take a look. Where is there something similar right now in the threat modeling space that is a curated list of threats for the industry? There isn't. What we have, compared to Pasta is something like Stride, which since 1997 has always been Stride. So you take a look at threats in 1997, 1998, the pre-dot-com era, and you go to now in this AI, world that we live in. Yeah, the threats are different, very different, right? You have a lot of threats that, were not present then. So in Stride, you have 6 buckets, they call 6 categorizations of threats, and they never mutate.
Mhm.
Extortion, for example, doesn't fit into any one of those buckets in Stride. So that's why we're really big on Pasta. Pasta is actually been endorsed by the cybersecurity czar at the White House, the late former Howard Schmidt, General Howard Schmidt. It's been adopted by some of Google's cybersecurity global programs. GitLab. Oh, check this out. If you just go to Google and you want to learn more about a major company that's adopted it, just type in Pasta, threat modeling, and GitLab. And then what you're going to come up is, in their own words, how we're creating a threat model framework that works for, it says for us, right? So this is a blog that they came out with, and that works for GitLab. Now they manufacture software, and they basically said, hey, we're using Pasta as a base. Again, you can make your own pasta, right? It's just not about using 1 through 7. You can literally use, it's meant to be a methodology because people want to know, how do I get started? What are my inputs and outputs, right? So, but hopefully I answered your question on the threats. Definitely, if you want to check this out, go to the GitHub Versprite fork community page and take a look at those free threat libraries.
And if we want to find you and what you're working on online as well, where can we look?
Definitely, I'm everly present on LinkedIn and on Twitter. I'm T0NYUV on Twitter and or on X. I still say Twitter. And on LinkedIn, I'm just Tony UV. But yeah, those are the easiest ways to find me.
All right, great. Thank you so much for coming to the show, Tony. I really appreciate your insight into threat modeling, and we'll see you next time.
Sounds great. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.